Hello and welcome back to Comics Over Time. This season, which we're calling Murdock and Marvel, a history of Marvel Comics starring Daredevil, we're breaking down the year in the comic book industry in two parts. In part one, we'll look at the state of the comic book industry as a whole, as well as what things were going on in society that may have impacted the comic book industry during that year. We'll talk big picture about what's going on at DC and independent comics, then we'll shift our focus to Marvel. We'll look at who is creating comics, what new characters or storylines were introduced, and which comics debuted or ended. In part 2, we'll dive deep into Marvel's longest-running characters, Matt Murdock. We'll look at what the year had in store for the Man Without Fear, key things that happened, and who joined or left his world before spotlighting one key issue or story. From there, we'll wrap up the year's discussion with a takeaway before moving on to another year and a whole new discussion. We're excited to have you join us on a trip through comic book history. We are back. It is another new year, 2007, for the Comics Over Time podcast. My name is Dwayne, and with me, as always, my good buddy Dan. Dan, how are you doing?
Doing great. Excited to get a chance to hang out and visit about some of these. It's an interesting year in comics, as it always is. So, could be some fun stuff.
I love that before we started recording, Dan's like, I pared it down. I have hardly anything in the show notes, but we still have like 6 pages. It says 13 pages of notes here. So that hopefully it's not, we don't go too terribly long.
I think what we're just seeing though is just that acceleration, that there are now so many shows and so many comics just in general, and so many things going on in the comics world that it does look like a lot. It does look like a lot. So I'm trying to take out some things. This will make it also more likely that something you really enjoyed is not going to be in there. For instance, I'm not even mentioning Vertigo hardly. And as usual during the early 2000s, almost all my favorite stuff is Vertigo. But they didn't have anything particular going on this year, so they don't get mentioned. Well, that's not true. There's one or two, but even so.
So you want to give us a little bit of an overview before we move on?
Yeah, sure. I think that this year is really something that as I look back on it, it has some large themes that start to come out of it. One of them is that America continues to deal with the consequences of 9/11, which we are now about half a decade detached from. We are midway through an 8-year Iraq war, which has been weighing on the country and its politics, its people.
Sure.
And something just seems to be changing on the comic book landscape. We're seeing a lot of really dark themes. There's a ton of destruction, and war is a constant part of sort of the narrative in all of our, especially Marvel and DC, but even in a lot of independent comics. All of this is getting more prevalent. Your stories are starting also to retreat into what I would call more conventional and traditional themes. So in many ways, we're not seeing as much of that swing for the fences, sort of really interesting and groundbreaking storytelling. We're seeing more sort of good versus evil types of stories that have kind of a black and white narrative a little bit more. Civil War was kind of that attempt at a real gray story, and it tore the Marvel universe apart. And now we're going to see them head towards kind of a different way of doing things for a little while. So, but in any case, it is a really interesting year. There's a bunch of stuff going on. Should be fun to talk about.
All right. Before we jump in and talk about the year in comics, we want to talk about something that happened as we're recording a few weeks ago, but because we're recording ahead, it ends up being probably about a month to a month and a half ago for you all. And it is, the podcast went missing for a couple days. And we mentioned a little bit about what happened in social media, but thought we would give you a little bit more of a explanation as to what happened. And it was that we got a DMCA takedown notice, or at least Podbean, the company that houses our website, got it. And rather than just make the one episode, which was our episode 4 review of the Daredevil Born Again TV show, they decided to completely turn off our entire podcast. So for 2 days, a little over 2 days, you could not find the podcast anywhere. And yes, there was some very unhelpful information to help us get back going. And finally, after some additional requests for more information, we finally got more specifics as to what episode was supposedly against copyright. Should point out that we didn't actually violate any sort of copyright. We did not have any audio or video or anything like that from the episode in there. It was just Dan and I talking about what we thought of the episode, and it but Podbean doesn't want to get sued, so they basically would not let us get the podcast back up until we removed the episode. So in any event, we were one of about 56 different entities that were tagged for Daredevil Born Again. Most of them were actually like pirated copies of an episode or multiple episodes of the TV show, and we were nothing like that. Yet we got lumped in with them. So
I think it's because of the name of the episode, to be quite frank. At which point
I'm
surprised it didn't get all of them. So
yeah.
In any case, such is the way.
So that's what happened. That's why we were gone for a couple days. That's why we are back now. And I think going forward, I think one of the things we will do is tweak the name of the podcast so that it more clearly states that it is a review of the show as opposed to just talking about with just the episode name and number in the title, and hope that is enough.
Crazy. All right. Well, there we go. So yeah, not very happy about this, but also the problem is, of course, if you were listening to this sometime in the future, if you are listening to this sometime in the future, you may have just noticed we didn't bother to review episode 4, and there was no notification about it. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Or maybe we'll find a way to go back and put in a notification. I don't know. So, yeah. But in any case.
But that's what happened. We wanted to let you know what was going on there, and we'll do our best not to get falsely positive strikes against us for copyright infringement as we move forward.
Right.
Thankfully, that hasn't seemed to happen when we're talking about comics. So let's jump in and let's talk about 2007. The year in comics. All right, Dan, 2007, you gave us a little bit of a preview in the open about what we were going to see this year. Let's start off in film and television. What was the year in comics like when it comes to film and TV?
It's actually a relatively light year in some ways, but there were some very interesting things going on. A number of direct-to-video TV shows. We had a Superman Doomsday animated, a Doctor Strange the Sorcerer Supreme animated, Invisible Iron Man animated, Hellboy Blood and Iron was an animated TV movie as well that I actually really liked. And then there was a direct-to-video creation called Mosaic. There was an animated cartoon starring a new character called Mosaic, voiced by Anna Paquin and actually created by Stan Lee. I think this is actually one of his final character creations for this sort of thing. None of these obviously went to any point where they would be anything particularly awesome. They are made for TV, animated stuff. Decent, but not particularly spectacular. The Doomsday one sort of redoes some of the Death of Superman stuff. Invincible Iron Man is one where he goes over and kind of fights the Mandarin, that sort of stuff. As far as actual like live action type movies, we had one that just barely made it to theaters called El Muerto. It's actually an independent film based on an independent comic by a guy named Javier Hernandez, and it was relatively well received, but it didn't make hardly any money, and then it went to DVD. But you did see a lot of these or we will see a lot of these as we're coming along, where there are small production companies sort of using comics to, like smaller comics that maybe don't have as much of a licensing fee attached to them, like to try and make a movie, or even some of the creators themselves being involved in trying to bring their comics to film.
Okay. So it does look like we did have some larger movies, though.
Yep. And so in order of how much they made, 30 Days of Night, the adaptation of the 30 Days of Night comic from a few years previous, opened mixed reviews, but did actually pull in $70 million, which is a pretty
Okay.
decent take.
Yeah.
And it was made on a low budget, so it made some good money. We had a new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated movie called TNMT. Budget of 34 million, brought in 95 million, which was decent. I mean, made money, but it didn't make enough money that they decided to continue with the franchise in the direction it was going. And this is going to be rebooted and go back to live action as of a couple of years from now. So call it a qualified success.
Uh-huh.
Aliens versus Predator, Requiem, brought in $130 million on a $40 million budget. You would think that would be pretty good, but it was relatively poorly received. Nobody really liked this movie particularly much, and even though it did make a bit of money, the further sequels were canceled. I think both licensors had decided that the Alien and the Predator franchises were better off going their own way instead of trusting to these guys anymore.
Sure.
So I think we'd call that a failure in that basically it, didn't make a ton, and it killed the franchise. Then we get to the interesting stuff. Ghost Rider came out this year. Have you ever seen the Nick Cage Ghost Rider vehicle?
I remember seeing things about it, but I don't think I ever actually saw the movie.
So I will note, and then I'm gonna also note this later on. I didn't see it in theaters because as of 2007, I have a newborn and a 2-year-old, and my years of going to the theater are pretty much over for a while.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm seeing these when they come out later on video or streaming and the like. But this is a kind of terrible movie, but it's a fun terrible movie.
Okay.
As many Nick Cage
As
movies
many Nick Cage movies
are.
typically are, yes.
$110 million budget, made 220 million. Technically, Ghost Rider had been in production as a movie project since 1992 in some form or another. So the fact they finally got it onto the screen is huge after a 15-year kind of production tale. Critics hated it, but it did get a sequel. So it made enough money that they made another one, which is what I'm starting to now take a look, because everything's about the sequel in modern Hollywood.
Sure.
You can tell whether a movie actually was a success according to the people who made it by whether another one comes out or another one doesn't come out. And this one, they liked it enough that it got a sequel. So you probably see the next one on the list. We've got Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer here.
Yes.
$130 million budget, made $300 million. So $170 million over budget. That's a solid hit in terms of money. Starred Griffith, Elba, Chris Evans, Michael Chiklis, that group. This is the one, though, that was the Silver Surfer movie that also had the Cloud Galactus that everyone's so angry about.
I've never seen it, so I have no idea what you're talking about. But
yeah, it's a thing. But basically, what this means is this movie made a bunch of money, and even so, the reviews were questionable enough, and a lot of the blowback was enough. It was the end. It was the end of the franchise.
Another one, yeah.
Yeah. And so, kind of unfortunate in terms of the Fantastic Four just never seems to get a break. We are really hoping that this year we're going to see a Fantastic Four movie that really connects with people. But I think the other thing to keep in mind, though, is that you look at how much money this made, even with it having all the problems it did. There's a good market out there for Fantastic Four. They just need to find it,
Yeah, they've had several swings at it, and it just hasn't really worked out yet. And
No,
This we're gonna get another one,
there was a
and
lot.
I feel like there's some pent up demand for it, I think,
No.
and so it'll be really interesting to see if it actually hits or not.
And then there's a lot of, there was a lot of online, as we get into 2007, now the internet, a lot of the fan forums and stuff are really becoming a thing. This is one of those first movies that you really saw that significant blowback at Marvel for a portrayal, that people were just so online, at least there were so many people so angry about Galactus. I think that threw them off. And we're going to see this continue to be a problem as we move forward. Another comic book adaptation was 300. This is Zack Snyder's first foray into comic book movies. He's doing his adaptation of a Frank Miller comic, $456 million take on a $65 million budget, which is
huge
really,
success. Yeah.
really successful. So this was the one that, it had a lot of CGI and the like. It also is sort of the prototype for a lot of the movies of sort of later years where all of the characters are insanely buff and you've got all of the crazy slow-mo stuff going on. It is hyperkinetic, hyper violent,
hyper stylized too. Like the look
Absolutely.
of it is completely different than anything that came out at the time.
And this is Snyder's genius, is he can make anything look beautiful. Like he really does have an eye to just make things look cinematic and cool. And it doesn't matter whether it's supposed to be cool or not, it's going to look cool. So yeah, I mean, super stylized. And we're going to see that his ability to translate a comic panel into film, not only in 300, but then later on when we see the same thing happen a lot in Watchmen, he has a real talent for it. Also, though, we now come to know that Zack Snyder, being a part of the comics world, comes with a whole new range of interesting problems. And so we'll talk about that over the next decade here as we or 2 decades as we move along.
I remember seeing 300 and really liking that movie.
It's a pretty fantastic
very good movie. Yeah.
It's people had questions about it even at the time because it is, the simple fact is now we talk about a lot of, the fascism inherent within superheroes and the like. It's absolutely inherent within 300. And Miller even talked about it at the time. He's like, the Spartans are a difficult people to deal with because they are bad folks for the most part. They are very, very violent. They are very much a slaveholding society, but women had more rights. And in many ways, they were this overtly undemocratic, fascistic society that nonetheless was the bulwark that held democracy in Greece. And so there's all sorts of weird things going on with that. And he said he didn't want to really make them, he couldn't make them as bad as he remembered from his research, them being in history. He said, I made them as bad as I can while still making modern audiences be able to root for them, which gives you an idea of kind of where he was coming from. So, but anyways, very successful movie. Meaning it made about half as much money as the next one on the list. So,
yes,
Spider-Man 3.
The big movie of the year.
Yep. Spider-Man's the big movie of every year it comes out, pretty much.
Indeed.
891 million on a $300 million budget. Its first 2 days, though, actually each of them set a record for one-day take. So the first one made a little over 100 million on day one and made like 115 or 17 million on day two. And then it ended at 900. What that tells you is, yes, it was successful and people, liked it, but also that it could have been a lot more successful if it had been a better movie.
Yes.
So
it's not a great movie by any stretch, especially when you look at it compared to the first two movies.
Yeah. And a lot of people have said, Avi Arad himself has admitted that he was sort of pressuring Sam Raimi to include Venom and to add that additional subplot. And Raimi when he talks about the movie, I think at some point he actually said he hated it or it was awful or something like this. Um, so the movie is not what he would have made if he'd had his choice. It is stuffed with too many subplots. It's got too much going on. I think the Sandman character, a lot of people actually thought was one of the better parts of the movie. There's
Yes.
also a lot of fun stuff in it, but it did
Some
just,
memes and everything
yes,
going on in there with
it's
the Spider-Man dance.
heavily memed upon at this point. But
Yes.
it is something that unfortunately uh, maybe had too much of a good thing in it, but made a ton of money. It was greenlit for a sequel, but Raimi spent like 4 years trying to actually get a script he liked, was unable to get one ready, and eventually he took himself off the project and they canceled it. So if he'd had a script he liked, they could have been filming on Spider-Man 4 within no time. And so such is the way of it.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sad to see them bring
No,
that to an end, because I think the subsequent Spider-Men that we've gotten since then have been quite good in their own right. So
no.
let's switch to actually talking about the comics themselves now. What was going on if you were going down to your local comic book store?
So quite a lot. I mean, there were a bunch of things going on this year. We're going to talk about the fact again that sales are up another 9%. We're at 429 million
Very
as an
nice.
industry in comic stores. That is up 18% on graphic novels though, and only 4% on comics. So sales on comics are basically keeping pace with inflation. Graphic novels are exploding. And I think this is something that comics retailers seem to just not notice, much to their own danger, right? That sales were going up and they didn't seem to be noticing where it was happening. But anyway, we normally start with DC, talk a little bit about what some of the distinguished competition was up to. We can do that again here as well. Um, there were a bunch of essentially wars in DC this year. Three major conflicts. You have the Sinestro Corps War, taking up much of the year for the Green Lantern titles. So we've got a sort of galaxy spanning Green Lantern war going on, starting with a
Okay.
book called Total War. The Amazons, and then in a book called The Amazons Attack, the Queen of Themyscira actually attacks the United States and attempts to simply take down the American government, which is interesting.
Okay.
And while all that's going on, Black Adam actually loses his family in an attack and starts his own version of what they call World War III in an attempt to avenge his family and um, take out a country called Bialia, a fake country that he holds responsible for their deaths.
Okay.
All of these are incredibly violent. They are, large scale conflicts. And I think it's interesting that you see this in an America that is in these wars, that you have essentially two sort of Middle Eastern groups, because the Amazons come out of Greece, kind of from that same Mediterranean sort of area, and
Sure.
then you have Black Adam in what is essentially a Middle Eastern conflict, is where his is set up. So international conflict is big in DC this year. We also have a couple things that go much the other way. There's a new book called Justice Society of America by Jeff Johns and Eaglesham. And it is essentially a reconstitution of the heroes from DC's golden age that are still around, or new characters who sort of fit some of those roles. Hawkman's in it, a number of people like this.
Okay.
That sort of harkens back to that age of better heroes, simpler heroes, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And I really liked this book at the start. And then about however many issues in, somebody comes along and basically murders everybody's family at a picnic. And I'm like, what the hell?
Oh
This is
God.
no longer fun. And
No.
so they kind of pulled the rug out from under me on that one. But I did like the idea of Justice Society of America when it started. I also liked they brought back Brave and Bold, which was a team up book. They've got Green Arrow, a couple things going on. They did a year one of Green Arrow, like they'd done with Batman and everybody else. That was by
Sure.
Andy Diggle and Jock. It's actually really good. And we did have an event in Green Arrow's life. Green Arrow and Black Canary actually got married this year. Except somehow Green Arrow had been kidnapped and replaced with like a duplicate of some sort, and Black Canary married the duplicate, not actually Green Arrow, and then things got messed up, and this really made me angry, to be quite frank. I was like, yeah, that's great. Let them have some happiness. But no, they screwed it up. But in theory, we had the year moving along towards a wedding between Black Canary and Green Arrow. Everybody showed up, ceremony happened, and then we had the rug pulled out from under us. So such is the way.
Seems to be a little bit of that going around in
Yeah,
DC.
yes, indeed. So, and then as a longtime or a longtime Legion of Superheroes fan, there was a new story called The Lightning Saga, which sort of was a reinvention of the Legion, because the Legion of Superheroes history and a lot of these things had been messed with quite a lot during the Final Crisis a couple of years ago. And
Okay.
so now we're starting to kind of see them rebuild what the Crisis is, or what the Legion's going to be in the modern DC universe. So that was a good one.
Yeah. So what's going on outside of DC then?
First, if we just go over to like Vertigo, kind of those DC imports, they have two or three really interesting things. They've got Scalped by Jason Aaron, which starts just kind of a very, very tough look at life on the reservation in the United States in the modern day. It's actually
Okay.
written by Jason Aaron, who is not a Native American, which caused some people some trouble. But it was
Sure.
overall relatively well received, I think, especially even by the Native community from what I'd heard. So, and it was a fantastic book, kind of a noir thrillerish type of story set on a reservation. Silverfish by David Latham. Latham had done a lot of stuff in independent books, and he came over and actually did some work with DC Vertigo on Silverfish, which is another one of his crime thriller type things. And then we had God Save the Queen by Carrie Ann Bolton, which is a sort of cool painted graphic novel thing that was sort of crazy and gonzo, and was one of the more interesting and subversive things that came out this year. So that would be a rough idea of DC. They did a bunch of stuff this year too, but that's some of it. Would you like me to go over all of it, or should we?
No. Let's move on and let's talk about Cracked. I always remember as a kid seeing that very much looked like Mad Magazine, only it was, same sort of stuff, just in a different package. And you have a note here, they came to an end this year.
Yep, Cracked had been going for 30, 40 years, or 30 years probably, and they ended this year. It's interesting because, yeah, they did come out of sort of that they're going to be a copy of Mad type of thing. They always really were, but they had their own stuff, evidently, and had become a pretty successful magazine. But we're starting to see the end of a lot of these original magazines at this point. Magazine racks are starting to shrink, and you're seeing fewer and fewer things come out in this format. So, sad to see you go, Cracked. As far as other things that came out this year, though, Buffy the Vampire Slayer came out with season 8. It's actually written by Joss Whedon. So Buffy was canceled after 7 seasons, not because Whedon had run out of story, but because Sarah Michelle Gellar had decided it was time to go off and make movies and do other things. She wanted to be in Scooby-Doo and the like. Whedon then, after a year or two break, actually took the stories he had and moved them over to Dark Horse and started doing comics, so that season 8 could essentially be put out. I think they planned on it to be like 30 issues. Instead, it ended up being way more than that, if I'm not mistaken. But in any case, it was interesting stuff. I actually, as a Buffy fan at the time, Steph and I read those, and thought they were pretty decent. So we've got The Dark Tower by Stephen King, his books from that being adapted by Peter David and Jay Lee. These were very successful. They sold just a ton because it was essentially Stephen King coming to comics, which we hadn't had before.
And Stephen King's books are somewhat daunting if you're not a an avid reader. I remember my dad was a big Stephen King fan, and every time he'd get one of those books, they're several inches thick, and it's like, no way am I going to try and read a Stephen King book, because I am just not. That's just too much for me. It'll take me forever.
And I believe these are Dark Tower like prequels and the like. They're not retelling the stories necessarily that Stephen King told. They're telling other stories in that universe. Yeah. So those are very, very successful. We also had some crazy stuff. I wanted to note that a book called Empowered by a guy named Adam Warren started up. This is going to be, I don't know, a weird subsection of American comics from here forward, or really even into the past. But just to note that they're still there. Empowered is the story of a young woman who becomes a superhero, and she's invulnerable, but her clothes aren't. So she's constantly getting in battles, and in the middle of the battle, her super suit ends up getting incinerated or whatever.
Oh,
so
God.
there's just tiny parts of it left here and there. And they're kind of done in a manga style. They're actually really cool stories, but the gimmick is that, you've got the beautiful Supergirl type heroine who keeps, losing her outfit. So American comics have not grown up. In case you were worried.
No, definitely, definitely not. So you've got something here called The Astounding Wolfman by Robert Kirkman.
Yep, he keeps bringing out new stuff every once in a while, trying to see if he can kind of, hit the jackpot again, like he did with Walking Dead and the like. But he's got Walking Dead and Invincible are still the two big ones that have hit. He actually now has a new one called Void Rivals that came out that is potentially going to be something that's going to be a long-term thing through its connection to the Transformers universe, but we'll see. But for now, I actually liked Astounding Wolfman. I thought it was fun. It did not end up being a super success, but was neat. Scrooge McDuck turned 60 this year, just as a note. And for his birthday, there actually was a book called out, essentially talking about how way back at that point, the 1920s, Uncle Scrooge, who was already a millionaire, just a simple millionaire, made his first billion. So it's kind of how the rich got richer, which I'm not sure is a book I want to read these days.
We learned how he started to get to the point where he needed a money bin. Huh?
There you go. Exactly.
There you go.
Also, one of my favorites for this year, the Umbrella Academy Apocalypse Suite came out. This is the first Umbrella Academy by Gerard Way and Gabriel Ba, and it just absolutely blew me away. It's a fantastic story, really well illustrated, and it was kind of different than everything else out there and made a real impact on folks.
All right. Any other last minute things you want to note, or can we move on to sales and industry?
Got two things.
Okay.
First off, Hack Slash came out this year, which is again a story of a young woman who, in your traditional sort of horror narratives, she would be the girl who's always getting killed by the serial killer. Instead, she ends up just always killing those guys. So essentially, it's a super violent kind of horror thing where you've got kind of a Buffy the Vampire Slayer with a chainsaw, essentially, something along those lines. It's by Tim Seeley. It's actually been very successful, still being published on and off today. And League of Extraordinary Gentlemen Black Dossier by Maureen O'Neill, the third and final book of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, came out. This is not really so much a comic book as it is a group of essays and explanations and drawings and whatever, kind of talking about the world of and the history of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. One weird note is Alan Moore actually wrote a song for this book, and DC had told him they were going to do one of those press records and put it in there the way that you had for the old sing-along books and everything, but they didn't do it. So later on, that was actually recorded and released somewhere else, but there is a song to go along with this book, sung by Alan Moore.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's something. All right, let's move on to the industry news. So you said sales were up 429 million, most of that, almost 20% of that being the graphic novels, whereas comics themselves are only up about 4%. What were some of the top selling books this year?
So Marvel had 40% of all sales.
Wow.
DC had 31% of sales. Dark Horse 5, Image a little under 4, IDW 2, and then everybody else, Viz 1.8, Tokyopop 1.7. It gets really low really quick after that.
Yeah.
But top selling book of the year is Captain America 25, which we're going to talk about. That's the book where Captain America is killed. That caused quite a stir, and it's also part of a great storyline. So that actually came in as the top seller. A lot of people buying 10 copies probably to be able to put their kids through college and all that.
Sure.
Second was Civil War #7, and third was Civil War #6. I have to say that is very unusual and very impressive, because normally every series that is published in modern comics, the first issue sells more than the second issue, sells more than the third issue. And the fact that Civil War was interesting enough and proved important enough that it ramped up so that the sixth and seventh books sold more than the ones before it is actually kind of, I wouldn't say unprecedented, but it's very unusual.
Yeah.
It bodes very well for the creators that people are, in this case, instead of getting a couple issues and then petering out, they're getting issues 1 and 2 and staying with it, or they're missing issues 1 and 2, seeing them on the stands and hearing people talk about it, and then ordering those later issues so that they can get them and causing for higher sell-throughs. So,
yeah.
Very cool. Other than that, Buffy from Dark Horse and a JLA book from DC were the only ones to break into the top 25 issues of the year. So 23 of the top 25 comics published were Marvel books.
All right, so that kind of puts a bow on the sales portion. What other things of note were going on in the industry, maybe even outside the U.S.?
So a couple interesting things. We had a comic artist who was knighted in Belgium. Benoit Sakal was knighted in the Order of Leopold II for his work in comics, which is kind of cool. We had the Folger Shakespeare Library host some comic art creators, Linda Berry, Alison Bechtel, and Chris Ware, in a discussion on graphic novels. And there were at least 8 major exhibitions around the world that focused on comics and or comic art through the year, which is more than I think we'd seen before. So you're starting to see again more and more appreciation by sort of the artistic establishment of what's going on in comics.
Yeah, I'll say that seems like a lot of recognition to the arts, right?
Yep.
All right, looks like some notable passings happened in 2007 as well.
We had 3 I'd like to talk about. And that's obviously, as we're now getting into the 2000s, there are a lot of our golden age guys and early creators who are starting to pass away. But one of them I did want to mention was Arnold Drake. He is a writer who is co-creator of the Doom Patrol and Dead Man. He'd actually been a writer in Hollywood and a writer of novels and all sorts of stuff. He ended up blacklisted during sort of the McCarthy era and everything like this, and ended up having trouble getting work. He is somebody who's been in and around comics for decades, writing stuff, helping to create cool characters and redefine characters. And his Dead Man is actually just a character I really, really like. He wasn't necessarily the one who put the stamp on the character. That would be the Neil Adams books that came a little later, but he did create him. He died at 83. Marshall Rogers, who was an artist I really, really loved. Englehart and Rogers did fantastic stuff on Batman. They did a Mr. Miracle run that I really liked. And he actually died from a heart attack just at age 57 this year, passing too early while he was still doing work. And then, even sort of more tragically, we had Mike Morringo, who was an American comic artist, dealt with books like Telos. He did work on Fantastic Four and a bunch of other stuff. He was an artist who really just made everything he drew interesting and fun. And he was
Okay.
somebody who everybody who worked with him seemed to love the guy. He passed away at age 44 this year, right in mid-career. And
Wow.
enough people actually liked him that he got his own awards named after him. So you have the Eisner Awards, of course. You have some of these others. We had, the Harveys and all of these. Mike Ringo now has his own Ringo Awards, which are essentially the pro and fan comic book awards. So anybody gets a vote in it, and it doesn't really have a like a juried selection element necessarily. It's going to be more just fan voting. So, but very, very cool stuff. And his Telos stuff, if you've got kids and you want to introduce them to comics, Telos is just a fantastic sort of story about this kid and his big tiger and all sorts of talking animals and stuff. I really love it. It's pirates and adventure and whatever else. So, and if you're a sci-fi or a comic like superhero fan, his Fantastic Four work is also really, really astonishing. Really great stuff.
Right. Let's move on and let's talk about the Eisners, the 2008 awards for work that was done in 2007. What were some of the highlights? Who were the big winners and stories and creators that received recognition this year?
A lot of these we've mentioned over the years. Dan Close again wins for best short story. Close just seems to always win the short story award these days.
Yes.
Best single issue goes to Justice League number 11 by Meltzer and Gene Ha, which he was in the middle. Meltzer was in the run of a relatively lauded Justice League run at that point. Best continuing series goes to Why the Last Man, taking over from Fables, which had been winning that previously. Best limited series is Umbrella Academy, which I think was very well chosen. Best new series, kind of surprisingly, Buffy the Vampire Slayer season 8 gets this, which usually licensed properties, that sort of thing, don't end up winning these kind of awards. But it was good stuff, and it was written by Whedon and Vaughn. George Jonti's art on it is fantastic. So I don't really argue with that one. Best
Okay.
publication for kids, we get the Mouse Guard, Fall 1152 and Winter 1152. My only argument here is that I'm not a kid and I love Mouse Guard. So I think this is miscategorized. They
Okay.
are they're just fantastic stories in general. Um, there's a bunch of other stuff, but if we go down to one that's a newer thing that's been added, Joss Whedon gets his second Eisner of the year with Best Digital Comic for Sugar Shock, also with Fabio Moon, which is cool that they were doing digital books, and also Moon is a pretty astonishing creator as well, so that's neat. Best reality-based work was Satchel Paige, Striking Out Jim Crow, which if you haven't read it, is a really good book. Uh, Best writer, we get Ed Brubaker working on Cap, Daredevil, Criminal, and Mortal Iron Fist. He had just one of the better years a writer can have in a lot of ways, because that's some pretty amazing stuff.
That's his second year in a row winning this award.
I would assume so, yeah, and well
Yeah.
deserved. Yep, that sounds
Okay.
good. Best writer artist, so doing both. Chris Ware got that for his Acme Novelty Library. Best writer artist humor would be Eric Powell for The Goon, which has been a consistent comic for years at this point. Best team, Pia Guerrera and Jose Marzen from Why the Last Man. James Jean retains his grasp on best cover artist. Dave Stewart and Todd Klein have their stranglehold on best coloring and best lettering. And then we get best comics related periodical. Newsarama actually wins this, the online Newsarama site. Best comics related book is Reading Comics, How Graphic Novels Woke. Woke is later going to do another comic that I really like, or another book that I really like, because he wrote one or did one called The Marvels, where he actually read every Marvel comic book from the first one to the last during the pandemic, and then wrote a book about reading every Marvel comic from the first one to the last.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a crazy person. Um, and
Apparently had
then
a lot of time on his hands,
had
I
a lot
guess.
of time on his
Yeah.
hands. Yeah.
So we got some Hall of Famers this year as well, too.
Yeah, a bunch of them, and some that I'm kind of surprised are just making it now. So John Broome comes in. He is a Golden and Silver Age writer who's most famous for essentially co-creating Sinestro and then essentially creating the Hal Jordan reboot of Green Lantern for the Silver Age Green Lantern. So he didn't create Green Lantern, but he did create Hal Jordan.
Okay.
Arnold Drake, who we just talked about, who died this year, actually was inducted in as well. R.F. Occult was the person who invented or the creator of the Yellow Kid. Yellow Kid was one of the first comic strips ever, and in fact is a weird strip because it was at one point running in two separate papers. Because when he made the strip, it became super popular. He left the newspaper he was working on, and both the newspaper and he claimed to have rights to the strip. And a judge said, fine, why don't you both just do it? So they found a new artist and kept doing their Yellow Kid, and he took his Yellow Kid to another newspaper, and they both published simultaneously.
Oh, goodness.
Character was that popular. Len Wein goes in. Of course, he helped, co-created Wolverine, creator of Swamp Thing, and he was one of the first people working on New X-Men. So a lot of those like Storm, Cyclops, all of those, he would have been a co-creator on them as well.
Yeah.
We also had Barry Windsor Smith, Conan, Weapon X, Machine Man, just a fantastic creator. It's interesting that a lot of his most famous stuff is done at Marvel because he's actually sort of this fine artist that you would think he would have had more stuff early on that is independent. A lot of his later stuff is, and in fact, he just came out with a book called Monster a couple of years ago that is sort of now his magnum opus. But a lot of the stuff that got him into the Hall of Fame was actually very traditional Marvel style comic books. Um, and then lastly, Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson goes in, which it is weird that he's just now going in. I guess partly because they focus mostly on creators. But this is the guy who actually founded National Periodicals. And he was the person who made the decision to, because reprints of comics and sort of mixes of new comics and reprints were doing so well, he believed that there was a market for making all new comic material and then making a single book of that and putting it on the newsstands.
Oh,
So Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, and he's a goofy dude. He literally all through life, he'd only let people call him Major because he had a military history, he was proud of all of this. He was the first person to publish an actual comic book in the size and the format that we have come accustomed to knowing of them. So he is in many ways the inventor of the modern comic book because
like the actual paper, the paper floppy comic book, right?
There
or
were
the
paper floppies before, but they were collected editions and they came in all sorts of different sizes. He was the first one to sort of standardize the size of the new comic, and his New Fun #1 from National Periodical was the first comic with all new material that actually said, let's pay somebody to make new stuff for this. Now, obviously, there are 100 points on that scale where you can say it's here's where comics started, here's where comics started, whatever. Wheeler has a solid spot somewhere on that pendulum of being the first guy to publish new material, to commission and publish it. He also was the founder of DC Comics in the end. So National Periodicals turns into DC. He was not there for a lot of the success because I think his gambling problems or something made him end up having to sell the company. But nonetheless, I think it makes sense that he's in the hall. So that was a good call.
All right. So Dan, before we start talking about Marvel, what was your favorite non-Marvel comic of 2007?
So again, kind of a blur this whole year. I didn't read as much as I might have some years, but I would say that Umbrella Academy was my number one takeaway from the year. And I also did love the new JSA. Those first few issues of that brought me back to the age of, reading like All-Star Squadron and some of these books from the 80s that I had loved so much when I was growing up. So, yeah.
All right, that's quite the look outside of Marvel. Let's focus now 2007. What was going on at Marvel this year? The year in Marvel.
Excelsior!
All right, Dan. It seems like Marvel was doing really well. 40% of sales. They had a big year, it would seem, and this is still kind of dovetailing on 2006, which was the Civil War year, right?
Yep, absolutely a huge year. They got stories and events that come out this year that are going to resonate well into the company's future. They're going to affect the comics moving forward and also have a big impact on what we see on screen over the next couple decades. As usual, they won no industry awards whatsoever. The Eisners completely snubbed them, but they did sell a lot of comic books.
There you go. So total series this year.
470.
Wow.
Again, we continue to climb.
Yes. New series.
326 of them, of which 306 ended.
So 20 of them made it out of the year, basically.
20 more series made it out than we had in. Yep.
So and you have 315 that you have listed here as one shot or single issue stories.
So of those 326 new series that started, 350 or total series that started, 326 of them were new. 315 of those new ones were one shots. So we had what? Not a lot.
11 that were not just like single. Yeah. Okay. So where were we at? So how many ongoing series then does that leave us?
What I saw this year was there were 69 series in some level of ongoing. Either they continued into the year or they continued out of the year.
Gotcha. Okay. And so you have a note here, the highest like issue number on a title this year was Uncanny X-Men.
Yeah, we've been doing that for a while. Uncanny is going to continue being that now. Most of them have been rebooted and the like. Uncanny keeps plugging along at 405. So
very nice.
No.
So what was the year events look like? What all happened? There's a lot of things listed here.
Yes. Remember when there were no events for a while? Quesada had that.
Yeah.
He's lost his mind. So we had a bunch of them. There was one called Silent War. There was one called The Initiative, which ran about 80 books. World War Hulk ran 52 books. We had two X-Men Endangered Species, which were 17 books, and X-Men Messiah Complex, which were 13, which all sort of involved Beast trying to find essentially a cure for some of the things that Scarlet Witch had done when she ended mutants. And then in Messiah Complex, we have the first mutant born since no more mutants, and start to see how the various factions of the mutant world will deal with trying to get that kid for various reasons.
Gotcha.
There's also one more, a little something called One More Day, which we're going to talk about, which fractures Marvel in half over the next year or so. So we're going to see how this works. And not Marvel, the storylines really, but Marvel, the fandom in half.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. I'm not familiar at all with One More Day, so we will have to talk about that. So
you will be.
Yeah. So. Okay. So events and what's going on in Marvel. I think we're talking like in the books. What are some of the big things that we're seeing?
So the Fractionaja Iron Fist comes out, and it is fantastic. They reboot that character and then start giving some more depth to sort of his history and the history of Kunlun. You've now got two Avengers titles, because you've got the Mighty Avengers working for the government, while the new Avengers are still sort of outlawed and working underground.
Okay.
We've got something called Silent War, which is that sort of conflict between Inhumans and Earth, sort of like the Amazons invaded the United States in DC this year. The Inhumans invade the Earth as sort of revenge for the Terrigen mists being stolen in Silent War. We have Hulk actually losing his new planet. There's a ship of some sort that explodes next to Sakaar. His wife is killed. He actually blames the Illuminati, who were the people on Earth who'd sent him there for the whole thing, and takes a bunch of them captive and makes them fight like gladiatorial combats on Earth and everything. It's really a powered up Hulk from anything we've seen previously.
Okay.
We've got Straczynski returning to Thor to Earth, brings back the Donald Blake character. This is that series where essentially you see Asgard come down as this like floating mountain over Oklahoma. If you remember
okay.
those stories.
Yes, I do. I do remember those.
It's pretty crazy and also pretty fantastic. So
yes.
I like those a lot. And then we have Spider-Man with his One More Day. So what this is about is, for those of you who weren't involved in this furor back in the day, during an attempt to get Spider-Man, somehow Aunt May becomes critically injured and is in a coma. Spider-Man, of course, blames himself.
Of course.
And Mephisto then, smelling blood in the water, and Mephisto, you've seen him in Daredevil comics.
Yes,
He's this
yes.
demon type of guy, right?
Right.
He comes down and he makes a deal. It's a deal with the devil, literally.
Literally, yeah.
With Peter and Mary Jane. He tells them, look, there's been a lot of things going on in your life right now. How about I'm willing to bring Aunt May back. But my price is that the two of you and your love will never be anymore. So we'll return to a world where you're not married, you've never been in love, and you can never be in love.
Wow.
And he's like, and they're like, well, what do you get out of these? He's like, I don't get anything except that even though you won't remember this, somewhere deep in your soul will be a part that always will know what you've lost. And I'm just going to be there enjoying that tiny little suffering forever. Right?
Yeah.
Because he's a dick. Because he's
Mephisto,
right?
Yes.
And they end up taking him up on the deal. Now, the reason for this is that Quesada and a lot of the folks at Marvel were worried about what they were going to do with Spider-Man. They didn't like the fact that he was getting older. They didn't like the fact he was married. They didn't like the fact that during Civil War, Iron Man had convinced Spidey to actually reveal his identity. So you had all of these things that made Spider-Man a very difficult character to kind of deal with now because everybody knew who he was. He's married, he's getting old. And they're like, how about we just get rid of all of that? So now in the new world, they change it so nobody remembers who he is anymore. They change it so he's not married. And the idea was everybody's going to be happy because we go back to a Spider-Man that's more like the Spidey that people liked in the 60s and 70s. The problem is there were an awful lot of people who grew up in the 70s and 80s and even the 60s who were perfectly happy that they had a Spider-Man
with
who
the
was
Spider-Man
also
they have now,
getting old and was married and was, and so there was a huge backlash from those folks who were like, you just invalidated God knows how many years of comics because Spider-Man got married in like the 90s sometime. You know, you're talking a decade or more of Marvel Spider-Man comics that essentially now didn't really happen or didn't happen the way we thought they did. Because any part of the story that is Peter and MJ no longer happened. And this did not go over great with a lot of the fandom. It caused a huge rift. It caused some people to say, I'm never buying another Marvel comic, all this other stuff. It's really one of the first times where you had an actual freak out from the fan base. I think most fans, you know, the various crises and all this sort of stuff, people got a little grouchy. People got a little sad when Superman was killed, but nobody really lost their shit the way that people did when One
Jeez.
More Day occurred, right?
Yeah.
And so they didn't really know what to do with this. It became a problem. And to be quite frank, it's still a problem today. And I would
Really?
argue that in many ways, the only thing that may have finally solved this is the creation of the Ultimate Universe last year, where they gave us a Peter Parker who's 40 years old with two kids married to Mary Jane, and essentially is a direct continuation of what would have been if One More Day had not occurred.
Right.
So there you go. But in any case, that was exciting, right?
Yeah. But it doesn't even feel like it's the top story this year.
Um, I
Is
think
it? Oh, I mean, oh, like Captain
it
America?
is it is in retrospect.
Sure.
It was not at the time
Right. I guess that's what I mean.
because Captain America got better, as they say, right? But
Yes.
yeah, during all of this, what's going to happen is out of Civil War, we have, the Registration Acts and all this sort of stuff. At the end of that, Cap is captured. Captain America is captured and he's taken to court essentially. And on his way to or from the courthouse, he's actually killed by a sniper. And we'll find out who that is later. It's shocking and all of that. But for now, he's killed by a sniper. With that murder, essentially you have kind of an end to the Civil War in that Cap is paying for his sins because he's, and Iron Man is in charge of everything. Iron Man then goes on to create something called the 50 State Initiative, where the idea is there will be a superhero or a superhero team assigned to guard each of the 50 states in the United States. So
Right.
everybody isn't just in New York. Now, I've placed in our document, so you can see them, the illustrious guardians of our home states.
Yes.
North Dakota got Machine Man, and Nova got Arizona. Now, I don't know there's ever been a story where Machine Man's actually been in North Dakota.
Sure.
These were alternate covers to a book called US Avengers, where they made 50 different covers, each of which had
Add their
a state
and
with a
their
representative on it.
hero. Yeah.
But I would love to see this story. If it exists, let me know, folks. But I think it was just a cover, and he was assigned, and then nothing was ever done with it. But there is this idea that they're starting to do the 50 State Initiative, bring out more teams, etc. We're going to see new teams come out of this. One of these is going to be a new group called the Order that's brought in, that I believe is to California. I can't remember exactly where. We'll talk about them in a little while. But yeah, I think that, the death of Cap, though, at the time, Brubaker's writing a fantastic Captain America story,
Right.
and then this caps it, right? And so, and then you get the fallout of it. Well, what happens? Who takes up the mantle? How do they avenge him? What's going on? Who did it? Why did they do it? All of this,
Right.
which then continues to be an amazing story. So Captain America is, as good as Daredevil is right now. I think it is Brubaker's second best book in terms of a lot of this stuff. So yeah, they're really, really good. Plus Criminal was really good. Maybe Daredevil's his third best book. I don't know. It's
I don't know.
an Iron Fist. I love Iron Fist.
2006 was a really good year for Daredevil, and 2007, spoiler to next week, not too shabby either, I have to say.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about new series then this year. What were some of these notable series that actually did go on for a little bit?
We had Mighty Avengers come out, which is that new sort of government-owned Avengers group. Nova, I'm not sure if this is set in outer space where it normally is, or if he's hanging
Arizona,
out in Phoenix.
yeah, there you go.
But Nova gets a story that's going to go on for 36 issues. The new Thor book goes for 35 or 36. Avengers Initiative goes on for 30 some issues. Immortal Iron Fist gets 28. Punisher War Journal, New Warriors, Marvel 2-in-1, X-Men First Class. There's a bunch of new Marvel Adventures books, which are kind of those ones more for kids. There's an Invincible Iron Man book that's going to last for about a year. What I think we're seeing though is a lot of stories that are ending at these 36 and 12 marks, which means that they're being shut down specifically to allow them to boot into something else rather than because they somehow didn't have readership or whatever. Iron
Right.
Man did not get closed down on the verge of his new movie because they didn't want to publish Iron Man comics anymore. They were going to publish a new one instead. So,
Right. Yeah.
no,
All right. So what about new limited series of note? You mentioned the
Dark,
Towers.
Dark Tower was a great series.
Yeah.
Ultimate Vision was a version of the Vision that was sort of half Vision, half Jocasta. It was a female version of the Vision in the Ultimate Universe. That was a really cool story. Iron Man Enter the Mandarin. You and I read that one actually. That was the one about Iron Man sort of first meeting the Mandarin by being dropped into Chinese airspace, uh, sort of like in the 60s or something like that. It had really kind
Oh
of
yeah.
crazy Ken
Yeah.
Stacy
Okay.
art in it. Well, we had Fallen Sun, The Death of Captain America, which was a tribute book that came out and was very successful. Marvel Zombies 2 came out following on the success of the first one. Daredevil, Battle and Jack Murdock, which we'll maybe talk a little bit about during our Daredevil time, but that was a sort of a history of Matt Murdock's dad and his life and his relationship with his wife for a little bit before Maggie went off to be a nun, him raising Matt for a bit. And then it's largely the story of his last days and last fight. So, kind of an interesting corollary book for Daredevil fans. Uh,
Interesting.
yeah, we got a new Howard the Duck miniseries, and then lots and lots of event tie-ins to all these crazy event books we've got, and X-related miniseries. So bunches of stuff.
All right. So with all of these titles, what new characters did we have of note? Was there anything that really jumps out to you as being a standout character that has gone
There's
on to
one.
do things?
There's one character who isn't
Okay.
actually new, but he is new.
Okay.
So the first thing we got was a new team, this order that I'd mentioned, which is going to have
Right.
like Anthem and Calamity and Hybrid. Uh, you've got a few others in there as well, Veda. So number of characters that are in it. None of them really took off, but those were all created sort of by Matt Fraction and Steve McNiven and Mark Millar back in the Order book. We had new agent of Hydra called Bob, who came out in Cable and Deadpool. We'd see for a while. Komodo came out in Avengers Initiative. You had Cloud9, Trauma, and Hardball all appearing for the first time in Battle Damage. It was created by Don Slott. Jackpot came out from Dan Slott and Phil Jimenez. Rose or Rose Red came out in Runaways. So Joss Whedon and Michael Ryans. Fat Cobra had his first appearance in Immortal Iron Fist #8, and Fat Cobra is cool, but I don't know that he's necessarily a character everybody's going to know. We also had Scar uh, by Greg Pak and John Romita Jr. That would be, as we talked about, Hulk's kid. I think he'd been
Yes.
mentioned or seen someplace previous, but this was his first actual full appearance. Um, and then the one character I haven't mentioned is our man Groot. So Groot appeared for the very first time in Keith Giffen and Timothy Green II's Annihilation Conquest Star-Lord #1. So why I say for the first time, but not really, there actually is a Groot character who's kind of a Marvel monster from back in the late 50s, early 60s. But he's completely different enough that it really
Yeah.
is just the weird name. You wouldn't
Uh
think there's two Groots in the world,
huh.
but
Sure.
essentially he is an all new character created by Keith Giffen, the
And this
recently
is
passed away master.
this is more like the Groot that we know now, right?
This is the Groot we know now. When you think about it,
Okay.
really, this Annihilation Conquest is sort of where we really start to see that team take place, and so this is the Groot you're going to see in the movies, pretty much.
Gotcha. Okay.
So he by far is the most
Yes. Like
well-known character
with a
of the
bullet.
ones from this year. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
In fact, outside of that, I think it's probably a tie between Scar and Fat Cobra, and that is not good. That is not good.
That's not exactly a murderer's row
No.
of things. Okay. Let's talk about series that came to an end this year. What were some of the notable ones that came to an end that weren't like maybe supposed to end? These are things that probably got ended to start something new, probably.
What's crazy is the number of the top ones. The only ones that had more than 24 issues that got killed this year were flip magazines, like Marvel Adventures or Ultimate Tales flip magazines, which are essentially were a different style of comic book, but there were things for kids essentially. New Excalibur had made it 24, and Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, another one for kids, had made it 24. Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane ended at number 20. Sensational Spider-Man at 19. Previous Iron Man series ended at 16. That one was immediately rebooted. Heroes for Hire ended at 15. Heroes for Hire is Power Man and Iron Fist. Iron Fist gets his new book. Power Man goes off to be like, the mayor or whatever he's doing these days that made it difficult to just be Power Man. Next Wave Agents of Hate only made it 12 issues, which is tragic because it was fantastic. Irredeemable Ant-Man ended at 12. Blade ended at 12. And then we had two series, Criminal and Kabuki, that were creator-owned stuff that were done sort of on that separate imprint by Marvel. And they ended at 10 and 9 issues. So.
Right.
Nothing that had gotten too far. We don't have any books that had gone 100 issues or whatever.
No, not even 30. There's nothing here that even went 30 issues. But it is interesting that there are 3 different Spider-Man titles that came to an end this year.
Well, Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane. I mean,
seems kind of difficult given one more day. Yeah.
It's actually kind of a cruel cancellation in that, there's no way that one could continue.
Right. All right, so let's talk about who was making all these books. Who's in the bullpen this year? So it's still Joe Quesada as our editor-in-chief, correct?
Until they take his head out on a pike, yes. Joe Quesada is the mastermind of One More Day, remains at the helm.
So. Yes. There was a storm brewing there, though, because of that, I suppose. How many creators got a credit this year?
596. And again, the way I'm counting now, that includes Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and all these guys because of reprints, because there's all of these essentials collections and everything else. It's very difficult to extract them, so I'm just not bothering.
Sure. How many new creators got a credit for the first time in 2007?
110. It's a decent number. Not too high, though. But
no, that feels like that's right on par about with what we had last year. I think we had just over 100 last year as well.
I think that's correct.
So of this 110, then we get to look for a Rookie of the Year. Who are some of the people that ultimately got considered, and then we'll talk about who gets the trophy.
So there's some people I like in here, but this choice was actually easier than choosing Groot as the top new character of the year. There were very few people who have had more than 100 credits who made it in as their first year in 2007. Simon Bolin, who's a letterer, had 173 credits for Marvel. Colleen Coover, penciler and artist, who's most famous for a series called Bandette that she does with her husband, Paul Tobin. Did a number of stories for Marvel over the years. She's at 151 credits. Paul Tobin, who's most famous for writing a series called Bandette with his wife, Colleen Coover, is also new this year. He's a writer who had 128 credits. He probably makes most of his money, though, from the fact that he actually wrote a comic called Plants vs. Zombies, which was then turned into a video game of the same name. And I assume the licensing and everything on that. He's
going to get residuals well into, the future.
If he had a decent lawyer, he should be doing just fine right now.
Yes.
But, and then Simone Bianchi is the other person I wanted to mention. Bianchi had 94 credits, didn't quite make it over 100. but as a cover artist and artist whose work is absolutely astonishing.
Yes.
Nonetheless, just has not done that much stuff, not really a part of creating a lot of characters that I can see or anything like that, but has done some beautiful work. He's done a lot of illustrations for like cards and magazines and stuff like this. I would not be surprised if you see a number of Marvel Snap pieces of art from Bianchi, but in any case, really good artist, has been at it for quite a long time, but hasn't actually done that much stuff for Marvel, evidently, which kind of surprised me. I believe we do have one series that we saw with Bendis and him doing a Moon Knight. I think he might have done the Moon Knight series where Moon Knight traded out his regular three alters for like Spider-Man and Wolverine and those
Oh,
guys.
yes. Yes.
So
I remember that one.
yeah, hard to forget. So, but
It
but
is.
but he did
So,
great work on it.
yes, Simone Bianchi actually does have one Marvel Snap variant in the game. He has a Taskmaster that looks pretty badass, if I'm not if I do say so myself. Very skeleton face with a kind of a cloak hood on. Looks really neat.
Very cool.
So if all those got consideration, who's the winner of the Rookie of the Year for 2007?
Jonathan Hickman did his first work for Marvel this year. And Hickman is going to go on to become sort of Bendis 2.0. Essentially, where Bendis kind of put together the Marvel universe of the Civil War era and did all this stuff and kind of left his stamp on it. By the late 2010s, that's what we're seeing Jonathan Hickman do. He wrote Secret Warriors. He wrote a long run on Fantastic Four. That's probably the first time I ever realized that Fantastic Four was badass. I
Okay.
never understood why Reed Richards was cool until I read those. Because Hickman wrote him as essentially like Indiana Jones plus Einstein plus some guy who is super attractive to all women and just is better at everything than every other guy. He
Yes,
truly
sure.
is Mr. Fantastic in those books.
Yeah.
And it was kind of cool. Um, he wrote House of X, Powers of X. He's currently writing the Ultimate stuff, like Ultimate Invasion. He set that up, and he's now doing the Ultimate Spider-Man books that have been basically setting sales records on fire for Marvel over the last couple of years. He's also done so much great indie stuff, like back in the day, Nightly News, Manhattan Projects, Fred Mast from Mars. As much as he's been great with Marvel, I kind of regret that Hickman has ended up spending so much time in the Marvel playground because his independent sci-fi work is just some of the best stuff that we had in comic books in the early 2000s, like around 2005 to 2010 when he's writing a lot of this independent stuff. Just absolutely amazing and very like clockwork. There's new stuff coming out that's awesome. Then he went into the Marvel sort of machine, and now he's doing X-Men books. So such is the way.
I say that is definitely a name I recognize, and
Yeah,
I
he's
think we've
everywhere.
read some stuff. I think I've heard many good
Yep,
things about Jonathan Hickman as well. So very deserving winner, I
yep.
think, of Rookie of the
And then
Year.
there's a new, I think it's called Ultimatum or something. There's a new event series coming out next year as well, with sort of Nova and um, some of the galactic heroes of Marvel involved, and he is going to be sort of plotting that out and writing the main series for that as well. So continues to be a big part of the Marvel universe even to today.
You go.
Yeah.
So congratulations to Jonathan Hickman for the Rookie of the Year for 2007. Dan, we got to get out of here, but before we do, your favorite Marvel comic from 2007.
I'd say probably Iron Fist, and of course Moon Knight, which is still ending up the Houston run, which is fantastic. And
Yes.
we don't want to forget Daredevil, which is still amazing as well. and had this
Yes.
100th issue and that whole previous sort of thing. They're fantastic as well. So
Yes. Yes. But we're gonna have to wait and talk about Daredevil next week because we're at time. We got to get out of here. So that's going to wrap it up for us for this week. Definitely come check out the episode next week where we pick up and talk about the year for Daredevil and have Dan's takeaway. I'd like to thank you for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, please consider subscribing on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as soon as it's released. If you've already subscribed, we'd appreciate if you'd share the show via social media or leave us a review. That'll help other new listeners find the show that much easier. And whether you're new to the podcast or you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts on this week's show. Tell us, did we miss your favorite comic from 2007? Send us a message. Social media, we're on Blue Sky at Comics Overtime. Send us via email, that address, comments@comicsovertime. We can have a public flogging of Dan and get your favorite comment recognized. Because he wanted to talk about movies and stuff. So
I missed a lot of them, but that's okay. That's okay.
Well,
Dwayne tells me we can't go 3 hours. So
yes,
I've been told
we can't. We cannot go 3 hours. Trust me on this. Trust me on this. But no, tell us. We'd love to hear it. We'll share it with you in a future episode. Thank you so much. Until next week, though, Dan, we've got another really good year of Ed Brubaker on Daredevil, and the back-to-back Eisner Award Best Writer.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he was doing Captain America and all that, but he wrote another really good year of Daredevil, and we get to talk about it.
Looking forward to it.
Until next week, take care, everybody.
See you later, folks.